cavalryman spent every cent of his final paycheck on a silent Apache bride nobody wanted. He thought he was buying a chance at a new life. But 3 days later, 40 armed horsemen rode out of the desert, demanding the woman back. What they revealed about her would change his life forever. The wind pushed dust through the streets of Dry Creek as Jack Callahan rode into town for what he hoped would be the last time. His cavalry days were over. 10 years of hard riding, bitter winters, and forgotten battles had left him with little more than a worn saddle, a tired horse, and a small leather pouch hanging from his belt. Inside was every cent he owned, his final cavalry pay. The town looked just as weary as he felt. Storefronts leaned under years of neglect, and a handful of ranchers wandered the boardwalks with nowhere important to be. Jack dismounted near the general store, intending to buy supplies before heading back to the abandoned ranch he had recently purchased for almost nothing. As he crossed the street, a gathering of townspeople caught his attention. Their voices carried a tone that made him stop. Some laughed. Others watched in silence. In the center stood a young Apache woman. She wore a faded dress that clearly did not belong to her. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. Unlike everyone else, she said nothing. She stared at the ground while several men argued over what should be done with her. Jack listened long enough to understand. The woman had been brought into town months earlier after being found wandering alone near the mountains. No one knew exactly where she came from. She rarely spoke, and when she did, few understood her language. The townsfolk treated her more like a burden than a person. "Nobody wants her," one man muttered. "Can't work with someone who won't even talk," another replied. The woman lifted her eyes for a moment. They met Jack's. There was no fear in them, no pleading, only a quiet sadness that struck him harder than he expected. Without fully understanding why, Jack reached for the leather pouch at his side and stepped forward. By sunset, every dollar he owned would be gone, and his life would begin moving toward a fate he could never have imagined. Jack left Dry Creek before dawn, guiding his horse along the narrow trail that led toward his ranch. The Apache woman rode quietly beside him on a borrowed mare. During the entire journey, she never spoke a single word. The silence between them stretched for miles. Several times Jack tried to start a conversation. He asked her name. He asked where she had come from. He even pointed toward distant mountains and rivers, hoping she might recognize something and respond. Each attempt was met with nothing more than a brief glance before her eyes returned to the trail ahead. By afternoon, they reached the ranch. Calling it a ranch was generous. The small cabin leaned slightly to one side, and the barn looked as though a strong storm could finish it off. Still, it was home. Jack dismounted and began unloading supplies. The woman surprised him by immediately helping. Without being asked, she carried sacks of grain, stacked firewood, and fetched water from the nearby creek. She moved with confidence, as though hard work was second nature to her. There was a quiet strength in everything she did. That evening, Jack prepared a simple meal. As they sat across from each other at the rough wooden table, the cabin filled with an awkward silence. Finally, she reached into the dirt beside the hearth and carefully wrote a single word. "Nita." Jack studied it for a moment. "Your name?" he asked. She nodded once. "Nita," he repeated. For the first time, something softened in her expression. Later that night, while securing the horses, Jack noticed something strange. Nita was standing near the edge of the property, staring into the darkness beyond the fence line. Her eyes searched the distant hills as if she expected someone or something to emerge from the night. And for the first time, Jack wondered whether she was hiding from more than just her past. The next morning, Jack woke before sunrise and stepped outside to begin his chores. The air was cool, and a thin layer of mist drifted across the fields. Everything seemed peaceful until he noticed his horse pacing nervously inside the corral. The animal rarely behaved that way. Jack checked the fence, expecting to find a loose board or perhaps signs of a coyote. Instead, he discovered a set of hoof prints in the soft earth just beyond the property line. They were fresh. Someone had ridden close to the ranch during the night. He followed the tracks for a short distance, but they disappeared into harder ground before he could learn much from them. By the time he returned, Nita was standing near the cabin, watching him carefully. "You see something?" he asked. Her eyes shifted toward the tracks. For a moment, she looked genuinely alarmed. Jack pointed toward the distant hills. "You know who made them?" Nita lowered her gaze and said nothing. As the day passed, strange things continued to happen. The chickens became restless without reason. The horses repeatedly turned their heads toward the western ridge. Even the ranch dog spent hours growling at empty stretches of land. That evening, Jack climbed onto the cabin roof to repair loose shingles. From there, he could see miles of open country. Movement caught his eye. Far away, on the western horizon, a rider stood motionless atop a ridge. The figure was too distant to identify. Jack watched for several seconds. Then the rider turned and disappeared. When he climbed down, he found Nita waiting below. She had drawn something in the dirt with a stick. It was a circle surrounding a small cabin. Outside the circle were dozens of marks shaped like horses. Jack stared at the drawing. Before he could ask what it meant, Nita erased it with her foot. But the fear in her eyes remained. And that night, neither of them slept well. Just before dawn on the third day, Jack was awakened by an uneasy silence. The usual sounds of the ranch were gone. No rustling horses, no distant calls from birds, nothing. He sat up in bed and reached instinctively for the rifle leaning against the wall. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats. Not one rider, many. The sound rolled across the ground like distant thunder, growing louder with every second. Jack rushed outside. The sight stopped him cold. Riders surrounded the ranch. They stood in a wide circle beyond the fence line, their horses motionless in the pale morning light. Some carried rifles. Others wore revolvers, strapped low on their hips. There were dozens of them, 40 at least. Every escape route was blocked. Jack tightened his grip on the rifle. Behind him, the cabin door opened. Nita stepped outside. The moment she saw the riders, the color drained from her face. She recognized them. A tall rider guided his horse forward from the group. His gray coat fluttered in the morning wind as he stopped several yards from the fence. His weathered eyes settled on Nita. "We finally found you," he called. Nita froze. Jack moved slightly in front of her. The rider's attention shifted to him. "This doesn't concern you, cowboy." "It concerns me if you're standing on my land," Jack replied. Murmurs spread through the mounted men. The leader studied him for a long moment. Then he spoke calmly. "The woman behind you must come with us." Jack didn't move. "No." The answer echoed across the quiet ranch. Several riders immediately reached for their weapons. The leader raised a hand, stopping them. "You don't understand who she is," he said. "Maybe not," Jack answered. "But she's not leaving." The old rider's expression darkened. "Then you've chosen the wrong side of a very dangerous war." For several long seconds, no one moved. The morning air felt heavy, as if the entire frontier were holding its breath. Jack stood firm with his rifle in hand while the 40 riders watched from beyond the fence. Behind him, Nita remained silent, her eyes fixed on the gray-coated leader. The old rider slowly removed his hat, deserve to know what you've stepped into," he said. Jack said nothing. The man pointed toward Nita. "That woman is not some lost wanderer from the mountains." A murmur spread among the riders. "She is the daughter of Chief Red Hawk." Even Jack recognized the name. Red Hawk was known across the territory. Stories about the Apache leader had traveled through military camps, trading posts, and frontier towns for years. Jack glanced at Nita. For the first time, she didn't look away. The rider continued. 5 years ago, she vanished during an attack on her father's village. Some believed she was dead. Others believed she had been taken. Since then, tribes, bounty hunters, soldiers, and outlaws have searched for her. Jack struggled to understand why one woman could inspire such a hunt. The answer came quickly. Whoever controls her future controls the future of her people. The meaning struck him immediately. Nita wasn't being chased because of who she was. She was being chased because of what she represented. Power, land, influence. The old rider's voice softened. "We aren't here to harm her." Before Jack could respond, Nita suddenly shook her head. Once. Then again, harder. The reaction caught everyone by surprise. Fear flashed across her face. Not fear of Jack, fear of the riders. The leader noticed it too. His expression tightened. "Nita," he called. "You know me." She took a small step backward, then another. Jack looked from her to the riders. Something wasn't right. If these men had truly come to protect her, why did she look terrified? The old rider sensed his doubt and immediately changed his tone. "Hand her over now," he said sharply. "This is your last chance." The kindness in his voice was gone.
A few days later, Emily appeared at my classroom door, holding an old yearbook she had found in the school library archives. "I think I found something that belongs to you," she said with a smile. Curious, I set aside the papers I was grading and took the book from her hands. The cover was faded, and the corners were worn with age. It had been more than 30 years since I had last seen it. As I flipped through the pages, memories came rushing back. Photographs of former students, school events, and long-forgotten faces filled each page. Then something caught my eye. Tucked between 2 pages was a yellowed newspaper clipping. My heart skipped a beat. I recognized it immediately. It was an article about a community fundraiser organized decades earlier to help my family after my father's medical expenses became overwhelming. Back then, I had been working multiple jobs while caring for him. Money was tight, and there were times when I honestly didn't know how we would make it through. The fundraiser had been organized quietly by people in the community, people I never properly thanked. Emily noticed the expression on my face. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I nodded. "I haven't seen this in years." She sat down across from me while I explained the story behind the article. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "Do you realize how much you've sacrificed for other people?" I shrugged. It was what needed to be done. "No," she said gently. "Most people say that. Very few actually do it." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Emily looked down at the article again. "What happened to the life you wanted?" she asked quietly. The question hit harder than I expected, because the truth was, I had spent so many years taking care of everyone else that I had almost forgotten the dreams I once had for myself. Emily's question stayed with me long after she left that afternoon. What happened to the life you wanted? I had asked myself that same question many times over the years, usually late at night, when the house was quiet and there was nothing to distract me from my thoughts. For a long time, I convinced myself that I had no regrets. After all, my sisters had successful lives. My father had received the care he needed. My family had survived difficult years because someone stepped forward when it mattered. That should have been enough. Yet the older I became, the harder it was to ignore the empty spaces in my own story. A week later, Emily stopped by my classroom again. This time, she wasn't carrying lesson plans or paperwork. Instead, she held a small notebook. "I've been reading something," she said. "What is it?" I asked. "A collection of essays written by former students." She opened the notebook and handed it to me. As I turned the pages, I found letter after letter from students whose lives had been changed by a teacher who believed in them when nobody else did. That teacher was me. One former student wrote about nearly dropping out before I encouraged him to stay in school. Another described how a simple conversation after class had helped her believe in herself again. By the time I reached the final page, my eyes felt unusually heavy. Emily watched quietly. "You spent years thinking about what you lost," she said softly. "But have you ever thought about how many lives you helped build?" I couldn't answer right away, because for the first time, I was seeing my life through someone else's eyes. And in that moment, I began to understand something important. Maybe the story of my life wasn't only about what I had missed. Maybe it was also about what I had given. Still, neither of us knew that an even greater surprise was waiting just around the corner. The surprise arrived on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. School had just ended, and most of the teachers had already gone home. I was organizing papers on my desk when Emily appeared at the doorway, looking more excited than usual. "Mr. Thompson, you need to see this," she said. She was holding a folder she had found while helping the principal sort through old school records that were being prepared for storage. Curious, I followed her to the office. Inside the folder were photographs, newspaper clippings, and letters connected to community events from decades earlier. Most of them meant little to me, until I saw a familiar name. Sarah. My heart nearly stopped. There, attached to an old article about a scholarship program, was a letter she had written years ago. With trembling hands, I carefully unfolded it. The letter wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to the school board. Sarah had donated money to create a scholarship fund for students facing family hardships. As I continued reading, my chest tightened. She wrote about the importance of sacrifice, kindness, and putting others before yourself. Then I reached a sentence that left me speechless. She mentioned a man who had taught her that true character is revealed not by what we gain, but by what we're willing to give up for those we love. She never used my name. She didn't have to. I knew exactly who she meant. For years I had believed Sarah had forgotten me and moved on with her life. Yet here was proof that she had carried part of our story with her all along. Emily looked at me carefully. "Is that her?" she asked. I nodded slowly. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Emily smiled softly. "Maybe some people never really leave our lives," she said. And as I stared at that letter, I began to wonder if the story I thought had ended decades ago wasn't finished after all.